I have to remember to stop dancing when the theme music fades out.
Same. Hello, and welcome to Project Failure Files. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode of our series where Sharon and I will explore what not to do as you manage projects.
If you're a project manager or have oversight of projects or do anything that's like that, this series is definitely for you. In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about some of the common pitfalls in project management, share personal stories, strategies, and best practices to help you find success.
We try to make it a good mixture of both theoretical concepts as well as practical examples.
And for this episode, we're talking about the impacts of ratings, rankings, and reviews on employee enthusiasm.
I'm sorry, I just had to make that little sound there.
Say that 3 times fast.
Yeah.
We're going to share some personal experiences and advice on how you can avoid the pitfalls as a project manager.
And our structure for these episodes, if you've not seen one of them, it's pretty simple. First, we define the topic, we dissect it a bit, and we do some basic analysis of the scope of the problem.
Sometimes a little more than a bit. And then second, we'll share real life stories and examples to help you understand the full scope of the issue.
Third, we'll talk about some of the practical solutions and actionable strategies that you can add to your own project management tool belt.
And we will also discuss at length the ever so important cultural issues around each topic, because to make any kind of lasting change, you need to understand and address your organization's cultural dynamics.
So true. And finally, we do talk about preventive measures, which is a lot to cover in 30 to 40 minutes, but we can do it.
So let's kick things off and talk about ratings, rankings, and reviews.
And of course, feel free to comment throughout the episode, share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed. We are tracking through the StreamYard interface. We can see questions being posted to YouTube and LinkedIn. I don't think X, those comments come through, but we will follow up on any other questions or comments after the show as well. So what not to do, Sharon? What jumps into your mind here around
this is such a big topic, like all the topics that we bring up. But when the first thing I think about is, the 360 feedback systems, which I just want to say up front. I'm not going to say what not to do is a 360 feedback program, because I don't disagree with them in theory. I think we need to think about, the whole thing we've talked about with methodologies and with programs and with processes. Everything needs to be curated to fit your culture and everything needs to be done properly. I don't think those types of things in and of themselves are bad, but I think oftentimes what not to do is to think that if you push in a system that's similar to that and you push it out and you use that information blindly with no understanding of what's happening under the hood, that will cause all kinds of problems. So definitely what not to do is just to kind of roll out one of those systems blindly and depend on it to answer all your questions and do all the stuff for you.
Well, thinking too, what's difficult about this, this is obviously a bigger topic and it has more to do with people management than it does around necessarily project management. A lot of PMs might be individual contributors and they're thinking, well, what does this have to do with a PM's role? Well, here's a great example of what not to do. And I remember bringing someone in, a relatively new PM, and they were involved in providing information into the performance evaluation process, and they relied solely on their external new person, but their external observations and opinions without getting feedback from other stakeholders. So here they were providing guidance to employees. And my first question to this PM was like, did you actually have a conversation with this person before providing the feedback? Like, that is the opposite of what I know to be true with what's going on with that individual. You took completely external data. I'll tell you, this is a problem that's a serious problem when you have leadership, especially when you get down to doing annual reviews and looking at rewards, and do people get bonuses? Do they get increases to their pay? And if you have just that external feedback, and upper management will often do this, look generically at, well, that team is not performing well. Wait a second. Do you have any idea of like what the team is actually doing? Like, it would have been 10-degree worse had this team not been rescuing this, which was a burning fire of a project, and yet they were able to go and keep it moving along. Anyway, it comes down to what we often talk about, Sharon, is you have to talk to people.
What? No, I don't understand. I just want to look at a spreadsheet and then go hide in my corner.
Well, when you think of conducting evaluations and the role of the PM, the project manager focuses usually because they own the project, they own the timeline, they own the budget. And so a lot of their feedback can be very negative when you're looking at the performance of the individuals. And often it's not their job. It's not what they're focused on, to acknowledge the accomplishments or strengths of the individuals that they're working on. Again, they're responsible for the budget, the personnel, the timeline. They're not thinking about everything else that those employees may be working on. It's just the project. And not that, again, it's not that it's the fault of the PM, not entirely. That's what the people manager should be looking at, that holistic view. And that's where it comes back to that the best practice of the 360-degree feedback is that you're looking at feedback from across various stakeholders, senior, lower level, that interact with that role to build a more comprehensive view of that performance. So your feedback, you have to be careful how you provide that is done in the context of like that project, that interaction.
Yeah, I think, if you want to talk about what not to do as a project manager, it's in the context of all of that saying, this is not my job. People management is not my job. And so I don't need to provide any feedback. I don't need to get involved in it. I just want to stay in my happy little spreadsheet land. And I don't want to have anything to do with that people political stuff. And I think it's very important for project managers to kind of put on their professional hat and understand that because they have visibility into the project as a whole, it's very beneficial and very helpful when they provide objective feedback about resources. And I'm gonna use the word resources as opposed to people, because as a project manager, we're looking at anybody and everybody who's helping us with things as different resources. And if you look at them as resources and you say this resource was beneficial or not beneficial in X way, and you objectively provide that feedback to the people managers, to the HR managers, to the people who are responsible for then doing a lot of those things, I think that it can really go a long ways to helping them understand kind of holistically that resources, what you should be doing to help them. Whether it's, coaching them into something better. And I never look at anything as, people are maliciously doing bad things. A lot of times it's skill set that they need to skill up.
Most of the time that's the case.
Coaching, yeah.
I mean, there are sometimes they're just, poor hires into the organization and everybody recognizes it. And rather than passing the buck, going in and clean that up. I know we were talking before we started recording, and one of the experiences, I was actually brought in as a consultant and I was there for almost exactly a year. My job was, in fact, they referred to me as Bob. They called me Bob because I was the consultant brought in, like in the famous movie Office Space, the two Bobs. Was to do performance evaluation and look at more, not so much, that was part of it, but to look at structurally the organization and completely restructure, reorganize IT. And I was brought in by the board and by the CIO to do this. And I took, a couple months. In fact, a couple of the board members were like, why is this taking so long? I said, and it was back to this point. Like, I don't want to make snap decisions about people's jobs. Yes. I want to truly understand. I want to kind of fit in. There were things that we were doing structurally, like putting a formal QA team in place, building out redundancy in our operations. I mean, things like that. And on the IT side of things, I did a lot of those things, but ultimately we cleaned house, and there were a lot of recommendations. And this the size of this organization, a couple thousand people, we laid off 40 people, and there were others that were moved elsewhere within that were clearly the right company hire, wrong role, or the restructuring, it didn't make sense
Right.
anymore, that we wanted to hold on to and move over into other roles. But we found in the 40 a lot of and we also ended relationships with partners, with vendors around this. So we found unethical and illegal behavior happening. So we had, it was rough. I mean, the years since I've done other projects, even when I was at Microsoft, part of my job on my last team was to take over other teams and manage out different employees and leaders and former peers. And so it wasn't always right. And in fact, of those, the 3 peers that were moved under me, 2 of them I helped find other roles within the company. Only 1 got removed from the company. But it's a lot of that feedback, a lot of it was going in and arguing with the leadership team, explaining the justifications for this. And there were some good people that lost jobs. Like, I get that, but wrong person, like not a fit for that, culturally not a fit in with the organization. Like, there were problems with that. And so this goes back to, like, again, what we were talking about before we started recording here, which is so helpful to everybody watching, that we have these conversations
Now let's
outside of the
reference
actual
our
recording.
side conversation.
Well, but what is the role of the PM in providing that feedback? And that's something you have to be careful about.
Yeah, I think at a political level, it gets very difficult. And so, one of the things that you should really pay attention to is we've talked about this before culturally, but what's the cultural climate? And what role are you in? Are you in a contract position where, if they don't like you, they can say bye tomorrow? Are you in a full-time position where maybe they're going to coach you first, or maybe you're in a, position where you have a really tight relationship with leadership, and so they're supporting you and say, no, I need you to do this. I think you need to know how you fit politically within the organization, to know what you can do and what you can't do. And does that match up with what you're being asked to do? Because what you're being asked to do and what you can do have to be, they have to be in harmony with each other. Because otherwise, if you can't do what you're being asked to do, you need to be really transparent and honest back to the people who are asking that of you, to say, look, you can ask this of me, but here's the risk you're going to present to me, if you put me in that position. And I think a lot of times people think of project manager as delivery or implementation, and they don't think about project manager in other facets of the role. And so oftentimes, we limit project managers' roles to really what could be in a large enterprise business as more of a project scheduler or a project control person, where they're limited to managing one piece of it. Whereas a project manager holistically is really responsible for the success of the project overall, and really does get involved in the political schema sometimes a little bit more than we want to talk about.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think too of the best ways to handle that. I know that if you're not directly responsible for those individuals, and a lot of management in general is achieving goals and outcomes that depend on other people that you are not responsible for. You don't manage those people. You think of where we've all worked in organizations, at least one organization, where they had a poorly defined and unhealthy evaluation process. So you have the problems and you recognize this. As a PM, you recognize this. You're working with decreased morale. You have there's increased turnover. Like, who am I working with this week, this month? That also reduces collaboration, where people are so concerned about covering their own assets. It stifles innovation. There's mistrust in management. There's mistrust of their peers. I mean, these are all things which are really difficult. As a PM, as a consultant coming in, and especially as outside consultants, Sharon and I both experience this, is that we have a much easier time talking with that organization about the structure, the framework that's in place, provide suggestions on here's what I see. I see these issues with this. Like, you're not going to be able to go in if they've got a rating system, like people are scored 1 to 5, they force rank people based on you must lay off 10% of your workforce, which, by the way, so Microsoft used to do that. They've jettisoned that. I don't know. I've been away for many years, 16 years now. I don't know what the current model looks like. But a lot of like it's the old, like, was it the Jack Welch model or whatever it is, of you're constantly looking at your bottom 10% and turning over. Like, that was never meant to be an ongoing framework. That was meant to be during a period of change, of cleaning house, of restructuring. You go in and look at it that way. But again, as a PM, what you can do is you can provide feedback as part of that 360-degree feedback. Again, being my approach is to be clinical about the project. Be careful not to get into the personality aspects of it, and to believe that you fully understand what else is going on in the lives of the work lives of people that you only have part of their attention, part of their role. But providing that continuous feedback. Question always is, Sharon, how do you provide that feedback back to as a PM, as a consultant, when you run into problem people that you're working with? How do you provide that feedback? Any personal stories there?
Yeah, I mean, I do this pretty consistently, and I'm gonna start my personal life because I want to kind of build up to how I think about things. I recognize, so first of all, that just marketing wise, it's like, for every 10 people that complain, one person will leave good feedback, right? So we think about just feedback in general. And so one of the things in my personal life is that if I have an extremely good experience, I will ask for a manager. So let's say I go to a restaurant or I go to a place of business, and I get just like something, I'm like, wow, that was really, really good. I will be like, hey, can I talk to your manager? And they're always like, yeah. And the manager will come over and is like, I just want to let you know this person did an exemplary job, and I want to make sure that you know that. And they're like, oh, thanks for letting me know that.
Yeah.
I do the same thing if I have an exceptionally bad experience, right? But typically I will not do it in front of the person or with the manager. I'll typically follow up in a written form. And one of the trainings that I've had in the past is the whole praise in public, criticize in private conversation. And so I follow that personally as well. I'll make sure and tell a manager this person's doing a fantastic job. But if it's a negative experience, I'll typically write it up and submit it, kind of online or behind the scenes or whatever. So they still have the feedback, but it's not like I'm not like chastising the person in front of them. And I follow the same way when I'm doing project management. So if I go into a client and I'm struggling with somebody, oftentimes I will write up, because to that clinical perspective, I don't want to get emotional about it. I don't want to talk people. I want to identify what are the concerns that I have about this resource. And I will write them up and I'll say, here's this resource. Here's the concerns I have. Here's the issues I have, and raise it just like I would a risks and issues list. And I'll submit that over to whoever the escalation point is and let them know. If it's something that's happening that's really, really good, first of all, I try really hard to tell people to their face, hey, I really appreciate that you did that. You did a good job. Just recently, actually, we were working on a very large project and working on it directly with Microsoft with some of the product team's assistants to get that delivered. And we ran into a roadblock that we were struggling with, and it was at the product level. We reached out to the product team. And somebody, responded to us and did a fantastic job of helping us get past that roadblock. And I reached out to him and said, hey, who can I let know that you did a good job? And so that person gave me a few contacts, and I sure did write an email that was like, hey, we experienced this thing. We experienced exemplary, assistance from this person. I want to write up something to let you know that. And so I think, that personal touch of being able to do it will hopefully then be something that person can copy and paste and put on that feedback form to say, not only am I doing this, but here's some feedback from a client that I got from that.
I was thinking too, as I was putting together kind of best practices, my thoughts around this. Number one is that, providing constructive feedback. That is an issue with a lot of people's, that we're so ready, as you point out, we're ready with the negative.
Mm-hmm.
But it's sometimes more difficult for the positive, and in either way, even if it's negative, to do it in a way like, what are they actually going to take away? What can they go and change this?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't somebody like, I'm a manager at a gun range and somebody's doing something stupid. Like, well, you go and you stop them, you take the weapon away from them, and you ask them to leave or escort them off the premises. That's not what you're talking about. You still need to work with these people, and so you need to provide that communication in a way, and it needs to be something that's not out of the blue. If it's part of the process during your weekly reviews, your bi-monthly or monthly, where you're going through, you're talking about the project status, you should also talk about the, maybe this isn't the best way to phrase it, but like highlights and lowlights of the people side as well.
Mm-hmm.
And call that out, like, hey, we need to work on this, we're having this issue, people need to be doing this, I suggest this training, I suggest this. Well, that needs to be part of that.
It's a risk and issue, just like anything else is. It's a risk and issue with a mitigation strategy.
Well, with any risk, and you brought that up, and that's right where I was going to go. I was thinking of like SWOT analysis. And if you've ever done a SWOT analysis, folks, you know that you identify what are the risks. From that, what are the opportunities to go and improve that? From your risks, from the negatives, you say, okay, what do we do with this? And so that's something I was actually, Sharon, criticized once, that I wasn't dwelling enough on what went wrong in the project, because I'm like, all right, how do we move past this? How do we fix this? I'm like that's my job, is to, this is the reality. Why are we sitting here? Why are we stewing on this? We realize this happened. Here's why it happened. Here's what we do to prevent this from ever happening again. Let's move forward. Here's how we get the project back on track. Or this happened, and yet our timeline is still, it's like, look, that was bad, and we need to not do that again. We're reinforcing our guidelines. We've written out these standard operating procedures here. Timeline is still on target. Budget still on target. Let's move forward. You can't dwell so long on those negative things, because then it starts impacting. That's a what not to do. Don't dwell. You need to promote facilitating development opportunities. That's what you do. You move it around to opportunities. Like, hey, this is a learning. Like, we need to go back and get a stronger baseline on this topic. We're losing people at this. So clearly this is where anybody that has done training, when you're looking at, and even in content marketing, you experience this, where you look at, where are we receiving all the questions? Well, clearly our training, our content around that topic is not strong. We need to go fill that in. And then we look at the trend again over time. And then there's other areas where it's needed because we're good in that area. But it comes down to promoting positive work environment, recognizing and celebrating achievements. I've shared this before in the past, Sharon, but in one of our episodes, like I've had a hard time with that. I'm getting better at it. But I remember talking with some of my direct reports, one of my project managers, and it was great feedback back for me. And she says, I think your recognition is the right level. I said, other people do it too much and it has less meaning. When you provide that feedback, Christian, like, it has more meaning. We all get it. Like, wow, it makes me think of, if you've not seen that, there's a great clip from Parks and Recreation where Ron, the director there, he's just like, it's saying something, it was nice to work with you, and to the woman leaving, and she's just crying. She's like, oh, Ron, that was beautiful. Like, all he said was, I enjoyed working with you. This is the most emotion praise that he had ever stated. Yeah. But and then the last one is, it's not the last. So collecting and sharing performance insights. So again, making that part of your process, so that your director, the people that you're working for as a consultant, your manager, that you are sharing, hey, I had these experiences with other individuals, especially calling out peers for doing positive things, just like the restaurant experience. So important. You need to do that. And then the last one is, and this is a difficult one, but encouraging self-assessment and reflection.
Yeah,
which we are going to cover in a future episode, by the way.
I've always been a huge fan. So I have a degree in developmental psychology. So as you can imagine, I have a huge fan of like, psychological, like personality profiles and all of that. And so I'm a self-development junkie, for sure.
Me
And,
too.
and I think it's just because, there's so much opportunity, for us to grow and be better and really learn to how to do that. And so I always, I probably kind of aggressively, help people to help themselves with self development as well. But I totally agree. I mean, I think, you should look at yourself as part of the team. And it's not like I'm over the team, but it's more like I'm responsible for the project and I see myself as a resource, just like everybody else is a resource. And so, those same risks and issues should come up if maybe I'm over project managing, or maybe I'm, being a little too micromanagey, or maybe I'm not being enough managey, right? So what are the things that I need to improve as well? And you were talking about celebration, and I think, we've talked, like you said, we've talked about this before, but I do think it's really important. What not to do is so many people see every single project and every single task as just, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder. And then there's like no break. It's like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And I think as a project manager, personally, one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is, what am I doing to make sure that people understand, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What am I going to get out of it? The what's in it for me part, just as much as, work harder, work harder, work harder.
Yeah, it's difficult to do that. I mean, we've talked about often. I really love that part of the end of the closeout of the project, doing the post-mortem, taking the time to formally reflect, to acknowledge what worked, what didn't work, what people did, what we got out of that, how that then changes the process. What can we learn from that? How could we not repeat these mistakes? What could we have done? Going through and not beating up on individuals, but talking about it as a team, as an organization. Like, here's what we can go and do. It goes back to why we constantly talk about the cultural aspects of all of these things,
Hmm.
creating a culture where people don't fear making mistakes. Like, you don't want to make mistakes, but they know that are there job ending, career ending mistakes? Sure. Yeah, of course there are. But the vast majority of mistakes are not, and they shouldn't be viewed that way, but a lot of them are. We need to build cultures where people are comfortable in sharing their wins and their mistakes, that we
Hmm.
can collectively learn from those things. I
Yeah.
I love those when people are able to come up and say, and I've had this, somebody comes in, shuts the door behind them, is like, "Hey, I saw this behavior. It's like, you should think about this. I would recommend this." Or when you're interacting with this team, like, this is why this is not going to work. Like, have those conversations in the closed door. It's fantastic. But being able to go and walk around, and I'm very much a manage by walk around guy, like going, how's this going? Like, on a daily basis with my direct reports. Let me know. Is there anything I can help with? Is there anything that you're being blocked that I can do to help
Mhm.
free that up? That move that along, go follow after with the client, go and work with the vendor, sit in some calls and provide feedback, or just back off. Don't worry. Like, don't touch this thing. It's gonna get, histrionic here for a few days or weeks. But this is what's going on. Don't worry. This is part of what we knew. But if you're having those conversations, if you have those communication patterns, then you're more likely to catch those problems quickly and move on. And you're going to that's part of my feedback on individuals, is how open they are in sharing of information. Are they hiding details about their projects, and we're only finding out when it's much later, where it's much more expensive or too late to
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah. I think the other part to that too is, one of the things that I think we do well in consulting, and no matter what consulting company you talk about, they get to see this holistic view of different types of companies, different types of projects, different types of cultures. I think when you work, especially in an enterprise business, and let alone if you'd been there for a very, very long time, you might only know your culture. You might only understand your culture. I think something that's really imperative for project managers, because they have such a holistic view of it, is to get outside your own culture once in a while. To the point of this particular topic, how are other companies doing this and how are they doing it well? Because if there's another
Mhm.
big what not to do, I would say that whole, well, we've always done it this way thought mentality around, this ratings, rankings, and reviews. If you keep doing it the same way for a bazillion years, it doesn't even matter if it's working or not, honestly. Employees eventually are just going to kind of get bored with it, and they're not going to understand, like, okay, that's nice. I've got the same ranking for the last 20 years. What that literally tells me nothing about myself. It doesn't help me understand it. The idea of looking out and seeing, how do other companies do this? How do other places do this? How do other cultures do this? How can I bring in maybe a little bit of a different idea to spice this up a little bit? Sometimes will help your team to understand how they stand next to other people or next to other cultures or next to other projects, as opposed to just being kind of the same over and over. Because it's that whole idea of, like, you're first in your own environment over and over and over and over and over, then you can't grow as a person.
Right.
So
Yep. Well, that's why thinking of preventive measures for this, I think of having those as a PM, regular check-ins with your people, so you're having those conversations, and that makes sure that there's ongoing support, that they feel heard, they feel involved and part of that process. They feel more valued and more trusting. And there's downstream benefits to that. Again, you may not manage those individuals, but they feel closer to you, more connected with you. Even if you can have diametrically opposed personality styles, but respect each other from the working in the work that you do together. And then they're more open to providing that kind of feedback, to be more collaborative in how they work with you. I'm a big fan of having those collaborative goal setting. So I would always ask people, like, what are your goals? What are your metrics against? And this is kind of the secret. I as you know, and you do the same too, I advise a lot of companies. I've worked with a number of dozens of ISVs. A lot of them ask, well, how do I work more closely with like an OEM like Microsoft? And I'd say, the goal to working with partners is just like peers, individuals, is what are your metrics? If I understand your goals for the year, especially being in a different organization entirely, if I understand those, and if I can then position myself so I know how I can help you meet or beat those goals, you'll be like, hey, I'm all about that. Every time I know, if I'm working with Christian, like, he has my goals in mind of how he can help me meet or exceed those. And then you're more likely to want to work with me. Part of that is you need to document the performance. So again, the highs and lows of that. It doesn't make any sense to keep that secret in your diary. Dear diary, this week Sharon did this thing that really upset me, and I think that she's taking this project down. And then when I see you, hey Sharon, how's it going? Like, no, it needs to be part of that. And then having that feedback loop. So whether it's one-on-ones, where you have the team roundtable go through and talk about that. I mean, there's a number of ways that you could do that, but providing that feedback, and then build that relationship with the people managers. And this goes back to your restaurant example. Like, you need to call on the manager to come out, like, hey, be aware that this employee is doing an amazing job, and this went above and beyond. That needs to be part of your persona of how you work. Now, step lightly with, especially with your constructive feedback, the more negative side of things, and how you do that. Again, you don't have the whole picture, but you need to find a way to provide that feedback back to the organization.
yeah, at least balance it as much as possible. So, for every constructive feedback you provide, try to also find a praise feedback to kind of balance it out. And I think you're exactly right. I think the more that you provide that objective feedback to people, the more that they're going to see you as a safe leader that they can come to and that they can make those mistakes and they can feel good about. And that way, like going forward, you'll have a good reputation within the organization no matter what.
Yeah. I was thinking about that for people coming in, they're thinking, oh, they're going to talk about ratings and rankings and performance reviews like that, specifically that side. Obviously, we're looking at it through the PM lens, but you can have a lot of impact on changing, influencing that evaluation process as a PM. It just needs to be part of your consistent, transparent process. And so, and the more transparent you can be, more open and collaborative you are with the people managers in your client, in your organization, then the more that they're going to listen to you, and that you'll have more of an impact on those systems.
Well, and I think if there's a place that you're trying to provide a specific piece of feedback that your current culture or process does not allow for, that's an excellent opportunity to poke a hole in that particular process and say, I really want to provide this type of feedback and I can't. How can we change that?
Yeah. I know that's a lot, as it always is a lot to cover in a single episode, but please be sure to follow us and subscribe for more great information like this. So there's our X profiles out there. Of course, you can find all of the episodes and future episodes you can be aware of and get the reminders of. We are every Monday. So right now we are scheduled every Monday. Like, we're not taking breaks for holidays. Like, we may not do it live on those holidays, but we have episodes going through right now until the beginning of March next year before we move to phase 2. So lots of content out there. And of course, you can also join us. We've created this group out on Facebook. A lot of people are like, out on Facebook? Really? It's like, yeah, the community space out in Facebook is actually the only place where I really spend time on Facebook. There are communities out there I'm a member of that have tens of thousands of members, some huge communities. And we have literally dozens of people in our community trying to build it out. It's relatively new. So please go join, follow us. And thank you all for watching and participating. And as always, Sharon, great to have another conversation.
You as well, Christian. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you guys next time.
See you next week.